Neama, good to see you here. I just want to show our viewers this because they didn't get to see this live. But Neama, I have to ask you this. What did you make of the reports coming out of day one of Cassie Ventura's testimony? This is the prosecution's star witness. This was the moment a lot of people had been waiting for. What are you hearing? How did it go?
I thought it went well, but the real test will be tomorrow when she's subject to what I expect to be a very aggressive and grueling cross-examination. Today we saw a very pregnant, 8.5-month pregnant Cassie Ventura take the stand. She was somewhat quiet and whispered during parts of her testimony, but I thought she did a pretty good job laying out her history with Combs and really the extent of his control. So let's sort of walk through it. If you're the government, you want to prove the sex trafficking. So you want to prove the coercion and the force. And with respect to the coercion, she provided testimony that the freak-offs would happen almost weekly and would last days, and that Combs would provide her with drugs, so much so that she would throw up at times. And I think that was good evidence of coercion. And with respect to the force, she discussed Combs's many firearms, his security, how he and they would track her, and they would actually find her if she wasn't responsive or otherwise was unavailable. So I thought we got some good evidence of force as well. And of course, paying the sex workers for prostitution, that also came in. So you have the elements of the crime, Andrew, but you also have the graphic and explicit details. We talked already about her throwing up, being urinated on, her having sex while she's menstruating, really disturbing details that those jurors had to listen to. And I could tell you from the reports in court, they were paying attention to her every word, unlike some of the prior witnesses where maybe they were looking around that courtroom.
I had asked some of your contemporaries in the last couple of days whether or not they thought this very graphic video that was displayed yesterday of Diddy abusing Cassie in the hallway of this hotel, whether or not that was the kind of prosecution's smoking gun, so to speak, or are they putting too much of their eggs in that evidentiary basket? What do you think about that question? What side do you come down on that question, Neama?
Well, I'm a former prosecutor, so I'm usually going to side with the prosecution. I think there is a reason why they are putting all their eggs in that proverbial basket, because that video does not lie. It cannot lie. And we've been discussing this case for a year and a half, Andrew. When that video came out in May of last year, it was so powerful that Combs had to finally apologize publicly. And even the defense in this case, they're really tailoring their entire strategy around this video. They are admitting physical violence. They've said that Combs is essentially guilty of domestic violence. Now, maybe that's not conceding a whole lot because he's not charged with physical assault or domestic violence in this case, even though it can be a RICO predicate act. But they're trying to draw this distinction between physical force and sexual assault. And I'm not sure the jurors are going to buy it necessarily, because they're saying that this was a mutually violent relationship. I'm sure they're going to really bounce on Cassie's own words today that she was insanely jealous. I expect to hear testimony that she too was violent and that this was essentially mutual combat. But, to the extent that we're talking about Cassie having a black eye, being dragged by the hair, bottles being thrown at her, I don't think that's anything that any human being can consent to.
We're watching TMZ video posted online of Cassie Ventura's partner and husband, Alex Fine, walking out of the courtroom there, as you can see. He was with his pregnant wife just today there in Lower Manhattan. In the meantime, though, Neama, I have to ask this. So the defense's argument goes as follows. Yeah, Diddy may be a jerk. He may be a sexual deviant. He may be into kinky sex. Those aren't crimes. What do you make of that? What would the jury make of that argument?
It's a good argument because really all they can argue is consent here. I mean, that's what separates sexual activity between consenting adults from sex trafficking. And they have to admit the physical force because it's caught on video. So when you're talking about consent, and this is something that we see in a lot of domestic violence and sexual assault cases, you have someone like Cassie Ventura that remained in the relationship for many, many years. When they broke up, she chose to leave on her own. So the argument is that, well, if you're really being raped, if you're really being sexually assaulted, why did you continue to go back? The prosecution tried to elicit some of that testimony on direct, and it's true that Cassie loved Diddy and she would perform these sex acts both because she loved him, but also because she feared him. And we're going to hear from an expert witness that's going to talk about the psychology of abuse. And I've tried many cases involving sexual assault and domestic violence, and jurors often tell me afterwards that they know of someone in a toxic relationship and with an abusive partner, and they understand why maybe someone would choose to stay, even though they would not, or you and I would not. That is part of the cycle of abuse, so it's not surprising in this case.
So is another kind of arrow in the prosecution's quiver going to be the juxtaposition between Cassie's life then and Cassie's life now? Do you think they're going to make that distinction? And will it
I
sway the jury, so to speak?
I think so, even if not explicitly, because her life now isn't necessarily relevant, but people are going to see that she's about to give birth and that she is in a loving relationship right now. And she has healed from this past trauma. And it really, when we're talking about what can someone consent to? Can they consent to, you know, being forced to have sex with a male prostitute while, their husband covers them in baby oil and directs them what to do? Is that really within the boundaries of consent in a decent society? I think it's a very tough argument for the defense to make. It's the only argument they can make. Frankly, they have to accept some responsibility for all of this. But I think they're really trying to thread this needle, Andrew, and I'm not sure they're going to be successful.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many hypothetical questions. I mean, I know we're still very early on in this trial. Two of them are as follows. Will some type of plea deal be struck throughout the duration of this? Or will Diddy testify? Will he be called to testify? Will the defense put him up to testify? Those obviously remain to be seen. What other questions do you have? I know we're early on in this trial, Neema.
Those are two of the biggest questions. I'll answer them, and I'll come up with some of my own. Will there be a plea deal? I think it's unlikely, and this is why. There's really not any type of deal that the prosecution is going to offer that will not result in significant prison time for Combs. He obviously was trying repeatedly to get out on bond. Here's someone that doesn't want to spend any time in prison. He's not some sort of career criminal in terms of his criminal history and being incarcerated. He's fought charges before and won the New York nightclub shooting case. And he really has unlimited means. And, when people talk about these high profile cases involving celebrities, and sometimes people think celebrities get a pass, but I can't imagine the Department of Justice giving any type of deal that doesn't result in at least double digit or 10 years in federal prison, because there's so many eyes on this case. Imagine the uproar if they gave away the farm by offering him probation or, a 1 or 2 year sentence. That's just not in the cards. So I don't think there's really any room to negotiate here between what the defense would accept and what the government can offer in a case like this. With respect to Combs testifying, I don't think it's going to happen, but I don't think we know yet. It's really going to depend on how that cross examination goes.
Okay.
If indeed they're able to beat up, and this is obviously metaphorically, Cassie and victim 2 and 3 on the stand, and they think they've made a strong enough case to poke holes in their testimony and raise reasonable doubt, I don't think they'll put their client anywhere near the stand, because imagine the questions that are going to be thrown out at him. I mean, prosecutors will be, licking their chops for something like that. That's what you live for if you're an assistant U.S. attorney. The other questions that I have is, victim 3. The government talked about her. She disappeared for a while last week. This is a former employee of Combs. Is she having cold feet? Was she potentially paid off? And the reason it matters is, you're the government. You really want to support the testimony of Cassie Ventura with other victims who are telling the same story. I'm not saying that Cassie's testimony isn't enough because the law says the testimony of one victim is enough. But sometimes jurors have a tough time believing one victim. That's why if you see in cases like Bill Cosby or Harvey Weinstein, you really see the government putting on victim after victim, R. Kelly, who are telling that same story. That's how you overwhelm the defense. So the question I have is 2 or 3 victims, is that enough to get a conviction here? Should the prosecution have maybe put on more, 5 or 6 victims, when you know where there probably upwards of 100 people that are raising these types of allegations? Did the government go all in on Cassie Ventura in this case?
Yeah, those are some of my questions as well. Neama Rahmani, can't thank you enough. Your insight and analysis has been so invaluable. I know it's only day 2. We'll talk soon. Thanks so much, Neama.
Thanks, Andrew. Talk soon.
All right, in the meantime here, we're just getting kind of started with that